Walter is 68. He bought his house in 1984, raised 3 kids in it, and for the last 4 decades, if you asked anyone in his life whether Walter had his money figured out, they would have said absolutely. Diane is 52, marketing director, dual income with her husband, a house with a pool, and a family trip to Europe almost every summer. She looks, by every visible measure, like someone who's winning. Jake is 38. Good job, no house, but an incredible group chat full of trip photos. Lisbon, Tulum, a friend's wedding in Napa. He's lived, honestly, a pretty great decade. And Priya is 24. She's got a Roth IRA, she watches finance content on her lunch break, and she can explain what an index fund is better than most 40-year-olds.
4 completely different people. 4 completely different decades. And every single one of them, in their own way, is standing in the exact same trap. Not a similar mistake, not kind of the same idea. The literal same trap. Just wearing a different outfit, depending on the decade you grew up in. And by the end of this video, you're gonna know exactly which outfit you're wearing right now. Here's what I need you to hear before I even name the mistake. This is not a video about people being bad with money. Walter, Diane, Jake, and Priya are not careless. They think about their money. They budget, more or less. What actually happened to them is way sneakier than carelessness. At some point, every single one of them was handed an unwritten definition of what doing well looks like. Nobody sat them down and explained it. It just showed up everywhere, in their parents' choices, in their friend group, in whatever the culture around them was celebrating that decade. And the second they could afford to live that definition, they did. It felt responsible. It felt like arriving. It felt like proof. That's the trap. Chasing the signal of wealth instead of building the actual substance of it. And here's the part that makes it so hard to catch.
From the inside, it never feels like a mistake. It feels like winning. Let's start with Walter, because his version is the oldest and honestly the most understandable. Walter grew up in a house his parents rented their whole lives. Back then, owning a home wasn't just shelter. It was the finish line. It was the entire American dream compressed into one purchase. So when Walter got approved for a mortgage in his late 20s, he took the biggest one the bank would give him, because that's what you did. And for a while, the math actually backed him up. Homes were appreciating fast. And today, Walter's house really is worth a lot more than he paid for it. Here's the number that should stop you, though. Boomers, as a group, currently hold about 51% of all household wealth in the entire United States, something like $83 to $90 trillion. Millennials, meanwhile, hold roughly 10 to 11%. That gap looks like generational failure on one side and generational success on the other. But look closer at Walter specifically, and it's messier than that. Most of what Walter has is sitting inside 4 walls he lives in. He doesn't have the pension he expected because his company restructured decades ago. His actual liquid savings are thin. He's 68 with a paper fortune and a real retirement that's tighter than it looks from the outside. The house wasn't the mistake. Believing the house was the entire plan, that was the mistake. Walter spent 40 years maintaining the signal, the address, the yard, the extension he added in 2003, while quietly underfunding everything else that wasn't visible from the street.
Now, Diane's version is quieter and honestly a little sneakier because it never felt like one decision. It felt like 100 small, completely reasonable ones. Diane came up in the era of the dual income household, the generation that watched their parents and thought, we'll do better, we'll earn more. And they did earn more. That part's true. But here's what happened underneath it. Every time Diane got a raise, her life quietly expanded to match it. Promotion at 32, nicer car. Household hit 6 figures combined around 38, bigger house. Kids started school, the Europe trip became a yearly thing. None of these were reckless purchases. She could afford every single one in the moment. This is lifestyle creep. And it's the sneakiest version of the trap because it disguises itself as earned reward. And here's the thing that should actually worry you. Right now, the US personal savings rate sits at around 2.6%, one of the lowest readings in over 60 years of recorded data. That's not just Diane.
That's most of the country. Income going up while the gap between income and spending refuses to grow with it. Diane looks financially successful, and in a lot of ways she is. But she's 10 years from retirement, and the math is tighter than it should be for someone who's earned well for 2 full decades. Her arrival signal was lifestyle, a life that looked like success, and she funded that signal automatically, every single month, without ever quite noticing the other account wasn't growing at the same pace.
Jake's version, I actually want to defend a little before I explain it, because the deck was genuinely stacked against his generation in a way that wasn't his fault. Millennials hit their early careers right as the 2008 financial crash wiped out the job market. Gen Xers in their prime home buying years during that same crash saw their median net worth in their late 30s and early 40s fall by more than 40%, from around $101,000 down to roughly $60,000. Millennials walked into a version of that same wreckage even earlier in their working lives. So when the old signals of arrival, the house, the pension, real home equity, stopped being realistically reachable, an entire generation reached for the signals that were still affordable. Experiences, travel, dinners out, concerts, and the culture fully backed this pivot. You can't take it with you. Spend on experiences, not things. Every brand, every influencer, every think piece told Jake this was actually the smarter, more enlightened way to handle money, that the older generations had it backwards. Jake spent his late 20s and early 30s collecting genuinely beautiful memories, but at 38, he has very little invested. No property, and a low hum of anxiety about the future that he mostly manages by booking the next trip. The trap was never the traveling itself. The trap was using experiences as a stand-in for actually building assets, while an entire cultural movement told him that was wisdom instead of avoidance.
And then there's Priya. And Priya's version might be the strangest one, because on paper, she should have already escaped this. Gen Z grew up with more financial content available than any generation in human history. They know what compound interest is. They know what an index fund is. And yet, according to a 2026 SurveyMonkey study, only 36% of Gen Z currently has any investments at all, compared to 45% of millennials, 50% of Gen X, and 52% of boomers. The least financially literate generation on paper is participating the most. The most financially fluent generation on paper is participating the least. What's going on? Priya's version of the trap doesn't live in a house or a lifestyle or a passport. It lives online. The arrival signal for her generation is aesthetic. The fit, the desk setup, the apartment that photographs well, the brand that quietly says, I have taste, I have money, I have arrived, broadcast to an audience of strangers. And here's the twist that makes this version almost impossible to see from the inside. Priya is investing. She's proud of her Roth IRA, but the same research found Gen Z investors trade roughly 3 times more often than boomers and hold speculative positions, meme stocks, penny stocks, at nearly 4 times the rate. The trap for Priya isn't ignorance, it's performance. She knows the language of building wealth and sometimes uses it to perform wealth instead, talking about financial freedom in one breath while her spending quietly contradicts it in the next.
So 4 people, 4 decades, one identical trap. What actually breaks it? Because some people do break it in every single one of these generations. And when you look closely at what they did differently, it's almost always the same move. They separated the signal from the substance on purpose. They decided, consciously, to look a little less wealthy than they could afford to look, so their actual number could grow faster underneath. Let's put a real number on why that decision matters so much. Every single percentage point of your income you shift from spending into saving compounds to roughly $75,000 more at retirement, assuming a 7% return over 30 years. Not the whole raise, 1 point. So take Diane's situation. Say she earns $75,000 and gets bumped to $95,000. If she banks even half of that raise, instead of letting her lifestyle absorb the whole thing, she's not just saving a little more, she's compounding an entirely different retirement outcome, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars apart from the version of Diane who upgraded the car and the house and called it earned. That's the entire game. Not depriving yourself, just refusing to let the signal eat the rays before the substance gets a turn. Here's why this keeps happening generation after generation, even to smart, careful people. Status signals work instantly. Somebody sees your house, your trip, your outfit, and they register it in about 2 seconds. Your actual net worth is invisible.
Nobody claps when your index fund goes up 4% this month. So our brains, which are wired for social approval way more than for spreadsheet numbers, default to funding the thing people can actually see. That's not a character flaw. That's just how humans are built. Which means beating this trap isn't about willpower. It's about building a system that doesn't rely on willpower in the first place. Automate the investing before the money ever reaches your checking account, and the signal spending has to compete with what's left over instead of the other way around. If Walter had done this, it looks like keeping the house but funding retirement aggressively alongside it, instead of treating one asset as the whole plan. If Diane had done this, it's picking one lifestyle upgrade per raise and quietly banking the other half, letting income growth actually outpace lifestyle growth for once. For Jake, it's one meaningful trip a year instead of 4, and automatically redirecting the difference into an index fund without having to think about it every month. And for Priya, and she genuinely has more time than any of them to fix this, it's making the actual number the thing worth being proud of, not the aesthetic around it. Building the number faster than she builds the look of the number. If you want the whole thing in one sentence, here it is. Assets first, signal second, every time. Not forever, just until the assets are doing enough work that the lifestyle is actually paid for, instead of borrowed against your future. Walter, Diane, Jake, Priya, none of them are bad with money. None of them are careless. They just inherited a definition of arrival from the decade they grew up in, and they optimized for looking arrived instead of quietly becoming it. Which version of the trap are you living in right now? Is it a house carrying your entire net worth on its back? A lifestyle that's grown exactly as fast as every raise you've ever gotten? Trips and experiences filling a gap where an actual investment account should be? Or a feed that makes you look like you've arrived while the real number stays quiet in the background? You don't have to answer that out loud, but you do have to answer it honestly, because the first step out of any trap in any decade is just being willing to name which one you're standing in. My name is Matt. Thanks for watching.